Well, welcome everybody. Here we are at Pilgrim Place. It's really nice to see you. Delays are common here. We take our time doing everything. But I did want to introduce you to Phalana Tiller, who I met as a race walker, and she's also the co-chair of Christine's campaign. And fortunately, she knows a lot more about this than I do. So please, Phalana, take over.
Thank you very much, Lynn. Okay. Again, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us tonight. As we all kind of intimated earlier, there's certainly some compelling national news that is hard to ignore. So the fact that you've made a little bit of time for us tonight is incredibly generous and noted. So as mentioned by Lynn, I am co-chair of Christine's campaign. And I just want to tell you a little tiny bit about how I got to be her co-chair and why it's so important to me to let more people get to know about Christine. We have, yes, Annie?
Could I suggest that you speak a little louder and a little slower?
Happily.
Some of us are hearing impaired.
Yes, happily. Thank you for reminding me, Annie. I appreciate it. I wanted to share a little bit about Christine initially and why I'm excited for her candidacy. And then I thought we could open the floor up to your questions and your conversation with Christine, because she's the star of this conversation and she's who you really want to get to know. I'd like to get out of the way and just facilitate as needed. So it's really just a pleasure to introduce everybody to Christine. We've only worked together for a very short while. I met her late this summer, midsummer, and when I hadn't really thought about the city council race yet. It was not quite top of mind for me. But I did know that we had some familiar candidates, an incumbent and some names that we'd heard before. And I hadn't heard Christine's name before. So I think that the bar was a little higher for me. I needed to kind of be convinced that I ought to pay attention to her. And it didn't take long before her work history in particular and her character really spoke to me. I understood that there was something that I hadn't seen before in our local leadership, in that she has experience handling massive public and private budgets in the hundreds of millions of dollars. She understands the implications of a budget deficit, and she's actually been an executive and a manager of people and systems and organizations. And she has this incredible ability to take all of those hard skills, but communicate in a way that's very personable and very real and very compassionate. And so I was taken with her as a voter, and then very quickly decided I needed to get on board more formally to help vote for her and help elect her. I've joked a little bit about how the choice between someone like Christine and some of the more familiar candidates is akin to needing a very sophisticated surgery to remove a brain tumor. And having the choice between the 2 or 3 very competent, friendly general physicians on my block, or someone who is maybe a little less familiar, but is a seasoned neurosurgeon who's actually performed such tasks. So for me, the choice is clear. And as sort of graphic as that example is, that analogy is, I have to say that I am really proud to be behind Christine, and I look forward to hearing the questions that you have for her and hearing a little bit about what's on your minds and what's important to you tonight. So thank you, everybody. Christine Margiotta.
Thank you so much, Phalana. I'm so grateful for your partnership.
Yeah, I know. Look at it. She's so beautiful.
Help has arrived. I'm so happy to meet all of you, to see some familiar faces. I want to thank Lynne and Charlene for hosting tonight. One of the best parts of this campaign has been meeting such amazing people across Claremont, and Lynne and Charlene and Phalana very much among them. So thank you for hosting. Susan, thank you for supporting all the tech elements of our gathering tonight. And thank you all for making time on a Friday evening, and especially, as Phalana mentioned, on a big news day. Very, very grateful to have this time with you all. So I'll share a bit about my background, and then, as Phalana mentioned, would love to hear your questions and have a conversation with you all. But I'll share first that Claremont is my hometown. This is where I grew up. I went to Our Lady of the Assumption, not far from Pilgrim Place, St. Lucy's, and then I spent my college years at Scripps College, and really look at my time in Claremont as foundational to what set the path for my commitment to working in community, to working on issues of social justice, and really a 20-year commitment to improving communities and lives across this region. So for the last 20 years, I've had the opportunity to work on issues like homelessness, racial and economic justice, education reform, a whole range of issues where I not only got to know what our communities are struggling with, but also had the chance to learn what it takes to make big change on any given issue, what it takes to really support our residents and to support our communities in thriving. So as Phalana mentioned, I'm currently the executive director of a nonprofit called Social Venture Partners, where I have the privilege of leading a team of staff, managing a budget. I'm also the chair of a countywide commission called the Citizens Oversight Advisory Board on Measure H, where we oversee a $300 million budget that is invested in the efforts to end homelessness all across the county. So between those efforts, I've had the opportunity to partner with government, with nonprofit, with philanthropy, with small business, and in that have seen really the puzzle pieces that need to come together to support our community, that each of us has a role to play, and each business, each governmental entity, that we all play a role, each citizen. And as I've watched our community navigate this pandemic over the last 6 months, I've realized that stepping into this this opportunity, into this campaign, is a piece of what I can do in that puzzle. So my wife and I moved back to Claremont 3 years ago. We're raising our 2 young kids here. You might have seen my daughter Vivian on my lap a few minutes ago. We have a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old. So over these last 6 months, we've been navigating distance learning for our kiddos. My wife manages a small business. I lead a nonprofit. Been supporting my mom, who's now living alone. And in this have seen a microcosm of some of what our residents are grappling with during this time, and realized that the work I've done over the last 20 years have prepared me to step in to support our city in this moment of crisis. So this isn't something I anticipated in my career path, but when I see a community in need and I feel like I have the skills and experience to be a support, I step in. And so that's what inspired me to step into this campaign. And it's been just such an inspiring and motivating experience over the last few months to get to know our residents and to have the chance, like we will tonight, to hear from you what your hopes and concerns are.
They have 2 kids.
So I will pause there, and just, I'd love to hear from you all, to hear if there are questions or challenges that you want to share, and we can just have a conversation. So I see Connie's hand.
What do you think Claremont needs?
That is a big question, and I love that question. So when I think about what we need, I think at the highest level, I think we need to come together as a community to decide together what our future looks like, and what we need, what the community needs, and how we're going to get there. So I see us often reacting in the short term. There's a new development coming in, and we all react to the new development. There's a budget process. Oh, we need to pass a budget in 6 months. And so we go through these short-term planning spurts. but I don't hear us having the bigger conversation about what is it that we need in this community, not just to weather this crisis, but to be sustainable and strong and resilient in the long term. And really penciling out, what'll it take to get there? What are the resources we have? What are the resources we need? Where's the gap? And then how do we make the most of everything we have to fill that gap? And then, you know, when it comes to the budget, if needed, we look at additional revenue measures. But in the big picture, I think about this opportunity to come together and really have dialogue about who it is we want to be and how we want to get there. So I would say that that community process of visioning together, but not just setting the vision, setting the plan and the path to achieve that vision. And that's a process that I get really excited about. I see.
Well, looks like, yeah, Kenneth might have a question.
Nobody else is waiting to speak. Were you aware of the article about you in Reader's Comments in the Courier today?
Yes.
Okay. I was just wondering if you wanted to comment on that. Because this man makes some rather ugly comments. He says your actions put you in the same camp as Trump, who campaigned in 2016, and the notion that Mexican immigrants are rapists and murderers.
Yes.
Pretty strong words.
Those were very strong words in today's Courier. For those who haven't had the chance to read it, one of our residents was reflecting on a blog post that I wrote that was in the wake of the murder of George Floyd over the summer. I wrote a blog piece that was reflecting on the history of racial terror in our country and the history of anti-Black racism in our systems of law enforcement. And this idea that it's important that we as a country look at this history and determine how it is that we need to shift our systems so that we don't continue to get this outcome. So I think anyone who's spent time with me would not make that comparison. That was a first, certainly, that comparison has been drawn. And I will say I'm someone, I believe deeply that people are good. It's just my belief in life is that that we are good people at our hearts, and I really look to our systems and how our systems are structured and shaped, and how that impacts how people in our communities are treated and experience these systems. So I do believe that our systems of law enforcement and criminal justice deserve a hard look, the systems and the policies. So I am not one to imply that all of the people within that system are bad people. I would never want to make that generalization, and I'm sorry that he drew that conclusion from reading that piece. But my intention and interest is that we look at the policies and systems so that we don't see people harmed at the same scale that we have across this country. And I believe the same is true here in Claremont. I think it's important that we look at the data. I participated in the police commission meeting last night. I attend all of the city council meetings and police commission meetings and school board meetings. So on the police commission meeting last night, there was discussion around the fact that our officers here in Claremont are beloved in this community. They are dedicated to Claremont and want to protect and serve this community. And so what I heard from residents again and again in public comment is that any examination of Claremont Police Department is not to imply that those officers are not good people and not dedicated to this community, but rather are there policies that are inadvertently harming members of our community? So that is my great interest as we look at criminal justice reform, as we look at law enforcement and Claremont PD included. I want us to look at the outcomes we're getting. So look at the data, and then to ask ourselves, how can we do better? Always. And I think that is the spirit of this community, is always to look at the outcomes for our people, for our community, and ask ourselves, how can we do better?
Looks like there's a question from David and Penelope, and then after that, Annie.
Okay, I was gonna follow on this question. Go ahead, though.
Oh,
No, Annie, you go ahead then. And then I'll go after you. You were gonna
Okay,
follow
well,
on
I
that.
was just gonna ask you, and this is from my point of ignorance. In our police system here in Claremont, how much do we do for mental health training? I'm interested in that because I think it's a real important subject.
Yes, I think that's such an important subject when it comes to our police. We know that many of the calls they're responding to they are engaging with people who are having mental health challenges. So they certainly do receive some training, and we've heard calls through the police commission from residents to encourage them to increase that training. But what we've seen in terms of best practices in cities across the country is that we restructure our systems so that when there is a mental health crisis, that we respond with mental health professionals. So no matter how well how many hours of training our police officers receive on mental health crises, they won't have the experience and the hours and hours and hours of practice that mental health professionals have. And I heard that from our chief last night as well, that they know that is not their wheelhouse. And I hear this as they talk about homelessness as well. They want to partner with Human Services. They want to partner with Tri-City Mental Health because they recognize that they're much stronger together. So, while there is some training, I would say I would like to see us deepen those partnerships so that the folks who have expertise in mental health can be those first responders. How can we broaden what we think of as first responders to include those with mental health and human services expertise?
So I guess
Yes.
I go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm Penelope Mann, and Christine, I'm so happy you are running, and I'm impressed with your skills and background. I wanted to ask what you consider the relationship between actions that a city council would take and the possibility of endorsing actions that should happen at the national level in regards to climate change. And I'll be upfront about I'm part of Citizens Climate Lobby, and we do support a piece of legislation at the national level now. And in the past, the City Council has endorsed the idea of a fee on carbon and giving the dividend to households. And so I just wonder what your philosophy is in relationship to local issues and national issues and legislation and endorsements.
Right. Well, thank you for the question. And I do think there's a close interconnection between the local actions, both policies, but also the actions of our residents and our city staff, and what's happening at the national level. So I've worked here in Claremont. I've worked closely with Sustainable Claremont and also with CHIRP, and through my partnership with them, have learned about the possibility of a climate action plan here in Claremont, and that cities around the world are making this commitment to be carbon neutral by the year 2030. That's what international climate experts are recommending. And so I would love to see us have a comprehensive vision of what that looks like, a comprehensive plan with concrete benchmarks, and to understand what are the policy implications at the local level, and then how can we as a city champion the national policy change that's needed there as well. Because so much of this, it's one of those challenges, I think, like so many, where both the implications are global and the action is very local. right? That the change has to take place in every single community across the country, across the world. And so there's such an interconnection between the policy change that needs to happen as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. I see Karen's hand as
yeah,
well.
Karen and then Chris, I think.
Thank you. At the Meet the Candidates session that we had a couple of weeks ago, I think it was Corey Kaleke made the comment that people come into city government with lots of wonderful ideas about what they want to accomplish, and then find themselves running into the government machine and discovering that it's a lot harder to get it done than you thought it was. I wondered what you made of that comment, if you have a response to it, and what your own assessment is of what might be the kind of roadblocks that you would encounter here in Claremont.
I do remember that reflection that he had, and also heard him say that it is an ongoing learning process, that he continues to learn in the role as well. So I consider myself a lifelong learner. So I won't say I walk in knowing everything I need to know. And I've had the opportunity to work very closely with government systems at every level, the city of Los Angeles, the county of Los Angeles, the state of California, working in, partnership with national politics, as well as here in the city, the city of Claremont, city of Pomona. So I've had the opportunity to partner with small and large local government, both from the outside as a partner, as a nonprofit, partnering with government, but also from the inside in chairing the commission that I mentioned at the county-wide level. And through that, I would say probably 10 years ago, I would have agreed with his statement that, my goodness, there's so much to learn, and what am I stepping into here? But over the last 10, 15 years, I've had extensive experience working very closely with government systems. And while I agree that there are a number of complexities, it really comes down to the relationships that we form with each other, and both understanding the systems that we're navigating together, but building strong relationships where we rely on one another for our mutual expertise. So that's been my biggest learning over the years in partnering with these complex systems. Is, I've spent the time over the last several months to get to know our city staff, to get to know the other council members, to get to know our residents, our nonprofits, and many of those people I knew before this campaign, but talking to them from a new vantage point. So talking to Adam Peary at the city and saying, what do you think we need for our city budget? How do you think we move through the structural deficit? Talking to Tara Schultz, to Ann Turner before she left, to each of them to say, you are the expert in this, and what are you looking to our city council for? So I will say I don't see the job as being an expert in all things in the city. I think it's the expertise needs to come in understanding how to lean on the expertise of so many people in this community, our staff, our commissions, our governmental business partnerships all across the city and the region, but also our residents. So that's been my biggest learning, and I feel very equipped to step into this role, knowing that I would continue to learn and grow, but also knowing that I have the core skill set in place to do that.
I think Chris had a question.
There we go. Thank you. I've got 3 short questions. How much do you miss Ruth Bader Ginsburg?
Oh, very much.
Thank you. Related to, you went to Scripps, as I recall.
Mm-hmm.
And David Mann and I worked with classes at Scripps, for intergenerational classes. And I was wondering if you see any sort of greater connection between town and gown that we could implement, either with citizens or, you know, whatever, if you see any connection that might be made, particularly if you were a student there, what would have been helpful for you?
Mhm. Yeah, I've reflected on my experience at Scripps, especially having gone to Scripps, having grown up here, and seeing Claremont through the eyes of students here, and feeling, to be honest, somewhat of a disconnect. In being a student, I felt like I was in a bit of a bubble. You know, we weren't engaging much in the dialogue in the broader city. And I think about the kinds of things that were happening when I was there. You know, that was during the time that Irvin Landrum was killed in this city. There were workers on our campus organizing their union. Proposition 22 was up for a vote in the state. You know, there were big issues happening in this community and across the state, and students were very eager to engage, but we often did so amongst ourselves. You know, we engaged in the campus bubble to an extent. But I didn't feel as much a sense of integration with the broader community as I expected to.
Do you have any ideas of how to do that?
Yeah, you know, I think about, and I've talked about, you know, looking at different structures within our community, that as we're grappling with a challenge, how can we ensure that there is representation on the bodies that are looking at those challenges? So whether it be a commission structure or just committees that are coming together to tackle challenges in this city, how do we ensure that the colleges are represented, both the leadership and the students, because of that unique perspective that they bring? And I think about that in the other direction as well. You know, both of our children went to the children's school, the preschool located at CMC, and the school has been shut down, and perhaps indefinitely. And that was one of those moments where I feel like the parents were so eager to support the school, not in continuing in-person classes. We all knew that that wasn't safe, but we're now understanding that they're thinking about converting the preschool to be student housing, and that the preschool may not continue to exist. And I think that's one of those challenges where the parents would be so eager to sit down with the colleges and say, how can we problem solve this together? You know, this is a treasure. I could cry thinking about that school leaving this community. That was honestly part of why we moved here, was finding the children's school, finding Sycamore, and realizing this is such just a treasure in this community. So I think in both directions, there are challenges where there's so many smarts in this community that can come together around the table to problem solve. And I don't think we have, that we've done enough of that. The decision is often either made by the city, if it's a City of Claremont issue, or made by the colleges, if it's a college's decision. And I just think there's so much opportunity for thinking together.
My last point was, I used to live in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and was active in the political scene there. And Cambridge used to host LGBTQ brunches once a year. And I didn't know, I don't know, I've never heard of anything like that in Claremont. And I was wondering how open you would be to something like that.
Oh, I love that idea. I haven't heard that concept hosted in a city before, but I really appreciate that.
It wasn't a sit-down brunch. It was like bagels and coffee before you went to Gay Pride in Boston. But
I love it. I love it. Yeah, and I'll say, you know, even having grown up here, most of my coming out and my you know, adulthood was in Los Angeles. And so when my wife and I thought about moving back here, my parents were still here, and we visited every week. We would drive out and come see my parents, but we were nervous as a same-sex couple to move back. We had no idea how welcome we would be here. I grew up in somewhat of a conservative home and wasn't sure, you know, what I saw Claremont through my parents' eyes. And this will sound very silly, but we went to the Village, and we would go into the shops, and we would ask the shop owners or the workers in different shops. I remember going into the Cheese Cave and Xerxes and just stopping by the shops and saying, we're a same-sex couple and we're thinking about moving here. Would our family be welcome? You know, what's your perception of whether this community would welcome us? And we found, we were Googling gay-owned businesses, and we found the Spot next to Trader Joe's. And so we went in there and talked to him, and it was a big question mark. There wasn't anything explicitly in Claremont that told us that we would be welcome here as a family. It's been slowly just finding our people and realizing, oh, there are lots of same-sex couples and 2 mom families and 2 dad families that have helped us feel at home. But we were very nervous to make the leap. So I love that idea, not just for LGBTQ folks, but I know there must be other communities that might have that same feeling that we were feeling as we were exploring this as a home.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I know David had a question, right? And then I think after David, we'll go to Jasek and then Teresa. Okay, I'll make quick notes.
Okay, I'm on.
Yeah.
Christine, I took Penelope's chair a few minutes ago.
Great.
And I appreciated some comments you made at the candidates night here at Pilgrim Place a couple of weeks ago about low-income housing and what you would do about that. And I want to explore that just a little bit more deeply. And I'm appreciative of having this more exclusive Pilgrim Place evening with you tonight. Thank you for prioritizing us. We're a powerful voting bloc in District 1, I think. So I hope we can do well by you. But I wanted to ask for there's 2 prongs to it that I know about you that draw me to your candidacy in this area. One is your history with HHH, and I wanted you to talk a little bit more about that and what are some of the connections that you could tap into for, where I'm headed is we're doing poorly on extremely low-income housing and very low-income housing, and we're only doing fair on moderate income housing at best. But I want us to go to the bottom end of the spectrum and make this a more economically inclusive city housing-wise. And so I want to know what you would think about and what kind of relationships you would have in the county to help us find assets. And the other thing is to give us a quick 2-minute or less civics lesson on inclusionary zoning and how you would see making that a more aggressive policy and what it might do.
Mm-hmm. Great. Happy to speak to this. And this is, as you alluded to, I've spent essentially much of the last 15 years working on issues of homelessness and housing. So prior to I'm currently at Social Venture Partners Los Angeles. Prior to that, I was with United Way of Greater Los Angeles. I was the Vice President of Community Impact there. And in my time there, I started an initiative called Home for Good, and that is an initiative to end homelessness throughout the entire county of Los Angeles. And over 5 years' time, we were able to support 35,000 people in moving off the streets and into permanent housing all across LA County. So including here in Claremont, but in communities all across the region. And we did that, we spearheaded this initiative and galvanized the community, but really it was each local community doing their part. And our role was really around bringing people together around this shared vision of ending homelessness and channeling the resources that were needed to do that. So you mentioned HHH. That was a measure passed by the city of Los Angeles. That is a housing bond that brings hundreds of millions of dollars of resources to the city of Los Angeles to build more housing. We followed that with Measure H, which is the countywide sales tax that our community also had the opportunity to vote on and now benefits from. So in my time at United Way, we actually helped craft both of those measures, HHH and H, and both of which passed with a 2/3 margin. They're a specific tax because the funds are dedicated to homelessness. They needed a 2/3 vote. And it was so inspiring to see first city of LA voters and then countywide voters vote to tax themselves twice. And that's as an aside, I think about that with our local struggles with CR and what I can bring to those conversations about how we build a community's will to make a decision like that. I believe we can pass measures like this, and it's about how we go about it. So in terms of housing here in Claremont, we are charged in the next year between now and October of 2021 with zoning for 1,700 new units of housing. So in that, we need to cite for over about 850 units that will be affordable to people of low and very low incomes. And so David, to your point, this has been a gap with our housing development here in Claremont. We have developed hundreds of units over the last 5 to 10 years here, and they have not been accessible to people of low and very low incomes. And so we've really missed an opportunity. And I think when we hear these numbers, 1,700 new units, I think about the opportunities we've had to do that, where we've missed the opportunity. There have been developments. This community does develop new housing. So you mentioned the inclusionary housing policy, which we do have here in Claremont. And as I've mentioned, and as you alluded to, that policy could be stronger. So right now, as new housing is being developed, the developer has a choice. They can set aside a percentage of their units for people of moderate income, or they can set aside a smaller percentage of their units for people of low and very low income. And over the last 5 to 10 years, all of our developers have chosen the moderate income path. They have not chosen to, it's an either or as it's written in the policy right now. And I believe one way to strengthen this is to require that there be a percentage of low and very low income. And to your point, extremely low income as well, as each of those is defined. We need to have a stronger policy because developers continue to choose that moderate income, which of course we need housing for people of moderate income as well, but we are at risk of not having any affordable housing for people in that income bracket. And I think that's very important that we send a message that Claremont is a place for all people, for all families, that we welcome all families. And right now we know that a third of the people living in Claremont are renters, and 55% of our renters are experiencing rent burden, which means they're paying more than a third of their income on rent, which is not sustainable. And especially in an economic downturn, an economic crisis, we know that puts those residents at risk of losing that housing. So this will need to be a huge priority for our council in the coming year, and one that I feel very strongly about and very equipped to step into that process.
I think Jasik, were you next, and then Teresa?
There, okay. Well, just following up on your discussion, coming from the economic impact of the pandemic, what are your first steps? If you're elected to the city council, where do you start?
Mm-hmm. So I think about the budget here in Claremont. We have been in a budget crisis in this community long before this pandemic, unfortunately. So we are stepping into this moment at a bit of a disadvantage, and I think this is an important opportunity to pivot how we do what we do. We've been in this cycle of one-year budgeting, of this short-term, what are we going to cut? Where do we cut from? This year, even pre-pandemic, cutting $2 million from our budget. And as I mentioned this briefly earlier, but I would like to see us do a comprehensive needs assessment in this community, where we both look at the data that's available to us about what the needs are in our community, and we ask our residents, because this is a moment of such turmoil, we ask our residents, what are the services and supports that you need in this time and beyond? and how do you prioritize the importance of various supports? And then we look at what are the resources we have and how do we make existing resources go further? So I was at United Way when we went through the 08 economic downturn. And that was right as we were starting this initiative to end homelessness in LA County. We launched this right in this moment where there were no new resources to be had. And I will say it created, it sounds cliche, but necessity is the mother of invention, right? That we had to be so creative with what we had. We came up with so many new ways of doing things that I don't think we would have thought of in times of surplus. You just often, when things are going well financially, you just keep doing what you're doing. You keep spending as you spend. But I think this is an opportunity for great creativity and not only frugality, but real innovation around how we do what we do. So I think those would be some important steps. And if we find that we're still not able to meet the needs that we have, then we start to talk about new revenue in this community, but we do so from this place of saying, here's what we actually need. Here's what our residents are saying are critical supports for them and for the future of this city. Then we can really galvanize around some kind of tax measure, whether it be a sales tax or some other, property transfer tax or a transient occupancy tax. But I think we need to go through all of those steps first before we jump to that end.
I think Teresa had a question.
Unmute. Unmute.
Yeah.
Teresa, you're muted.
I was trying to do it for her, but it's not working. Teresa, you need to unmute yourself.
Okay, that should do it now. I think I got the right button there. My question was around housing as well, and question about where you stand on proposition number 21. If there's something more to that we see or know.
So you cut out for just a moment. You were asking about Proposition 21. Is that right?
Yes. Yes.
And this is the rent control, right?
Yes.
Allowing local cities to enact rent control.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So this is something that has come before us as voters in different formations a few times now over the years. And I am a proponent of giving local cities the option to enact rent control. There is a statewide policy, Costa-Hawkins, that has made it very difficult for local cities to enact measures of rent control. And I think that's an important tool in the toolbox for a city. It's something we would need to discuss here in Claremont. I do think it's something, at least on a temporary basis, that we should explore as a city as we move through this pandemic. And I know there was a question on folks' mind about Prop 15 as well, that would increase property taxes for business owners. And I think it's important that we look at rent stabilization and rent control across the board, not just for residential properties, but also for commercial properties, that we think about how we support our small businesses and support our residents in having rent that is sustainable over the long term, that we're not seeing a rise in rent that pushes renters out of their housing or pushes businesses out of their business, especially during this time. So I am a supporter of Proposition 21, especially because it is that two-step process that just opens up greater flexibility for cities to explore rent control, and then cities would need to take that additional step to actually enact it.
We have a question from Meg.
Hi, Christine. One of Claremont's treasures is the Claremont Hills Wilderness Park. And I'm wondering if you and your family use it. What do you use it for? Hiking, biking, nature study? What do you like about it if you do go up there? And what do you see as the main challenges or problems that we face with regard to the park?
Mm-hmm. Yes, so the answer is yes. We do enjoy the Wilderness Park. That's something that I wish had been there when I was a kid. We discovered it when we were coming back and visiting my parents. We would often come early and go up to the Wilderness Park. And after having kids, my wife will often joke that our children can go about 10 steps before they're on the ground making dirt angels, as she calls them. So it's still a little bit challenging with our little ones, but we have tried to get up there on our own. I think, you know, I think about the intersection with climate change and how often, due to extreme heat, we have to close the Wilderness Park. You know, how often it is inaccessible, or we go up there and it's just so hot that it's hard to, you know, to do the loop and actually enjoy the benefits of it. So I think about that piece certainly as our enjoyment of it has been hindered, not only by caring for little ones who don't want to yet go for a long hard walk, but also just by the heat. So those are a couple of the things that I think about there.
What about the funding of it in terms of the relationship to the budget? My understanding is that the money that is gained from the parking fees essentially pays for the park expenses. And that there's kind of a Chinese wall there, that the park, running the park, the ranger expenses and so forth won't dip into city funds, but that conversely, the city won't tap into the parking revenue to fill up the general fund. So I don't know how you feel about that, whether that should be a strict separation or whether we should have some perforations in the wall.
You know, it's something, the details of that, I would want to understand that further. But I appreciate that it does have that sustainable funding mechanism that we can both sustain and preserve it through the revenues that it generates. I think that's one of those
that's the idea, yeah,
right, one of those creative mechanisms that can help us, you know, that we can learn from that for other areas of the city where we struggle. So I would want to understand better what that differential looks like on any given year if there is a large overage or deficit. But I do think that's a very smart model and one that we should explore in a broader way. I know certainly there was much discussion around parking meters in the village. I won't open up that can of worms here, but you know, I think about that kind of exploration and where we're willing to have a mechanism like that to support the livelihood of a given community treasure. And I think it's an important conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Did I see a hand from Carolyn? Yes, Carolyn. Looks like you need to unmute yourself and I can't do it for you. So, oh, do you want to type it in the chat? Okay. Okay. Is there another question from anyone?
Did that work?
Yes.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
Oh, good. I can do it. Amazing. Christine, you talked about some pretty big ideas and some, you know, what feels like long-term planning, looking at things carefully. And of course, that's a very important step one. But then if things are going to change, if big ideas are going to be implemented, we need buy-in. And it seems to me that has to be very, very widespread. The leadership in this community, it feels to me, and I'm not well informed on this, but it seems to me that the younger voices in this community, including a lot of college students, are not heard and they're not involved. And I think that's a mistake. They're voters, they're at least committed for 4 years. Not, you know, there are people here who've lived here for 30 or 50 years. They're committed too. But it seems to me that we need a broader buy-in, and that a lot of attention needs to be, some good minds have to look at how that can come about. So it's not a question. It's just, I think I'm probably telling you what you already know, but I needed to say it. Thank you.
No, I appreciate that. And I do think process is very important, and the way we engage community is critical. I think back to, you know, the comment on Measure CR, and, you know, how we go about these processes and engage the community in problem solving and thinking together and dreaming together, and then stepping into action together. It's both of those. But if we dream, you know, in a conference room by ourselves and then go out to the community and say, let's step into action together, in my experience, that's, you know, there's a stubbornness in us that says, wait a minute, I don't know about this dream. I didn't help craft that. That's not my dream. That's your dream. So even just for that reason, but also because we have brilliant people in this community that we're missing out on their ideas.
Happy to take another question from anyone, but we are approaching the 1 hour mark, so perhaps it's a fine time to say goodnight, unless someone has a burning question or comment. No, okay.
Well, I'd like to thank you very much, Christine. And one thing I'd like to mention is, you know, last week there was a pretty angry letter about the article you wrote about actions that we could take for anti-racist behavior. And did you have a chance to talk to that man at all? What happened with that?
Yes, so there was a letter to the editor, similar to the one that was published again today, and this, as you mentioned, it was about 2 weeks ago in the Courier. One of our residents had found an article, a blog post that I had put on Medium after George Floyd was murdered over the summer, where I facilitate a course called Anti-Racism for White People. And it is for those of us who are white, for us to identify ways that we can champion racial justice in our communities, in our interpersonal engagements, in our institutions, in our systems, you know, that feeling of, oh my gosh, what can I do? You know, in a moment like that, what do I do in my life? So I wrote this blog as guidance to the people taking that course and beyond. So a resident wrote in concerned about what I had written, and I reached out to him and said, if you're open to it, I would love to talk more with you and hear your concerns and share a bit with you about where I was coming from. And we had a great conversation. We spoke for probably 45 minutes on a Sunday afternoon. And I had the opportunity to listen to him and to hear his concerns about our budget and his concerns about our police force and where he was coming from when he wrote that letter. And he was able to hear me as well, which I appreciated that he took the time to listen to where I was coming from when I wrote the article, and why I'm running for city council, and you know what my motivations are. I think we both had some assumptions about each other that through conversation we were able to really hear each other in a different way. So I think he was maybe surprised that I reached out and wanted to talk after the tone of his letter was quite harsh, but I was grateful for the opportunity to talk with him. That's something that's really important to me, is that a door is never closed, that there's always opportunity for us to talk to one another and to find common ground.
Yeah, that's a wonderful story. I love it. Yeah.
I think one of the things, kind of to that same point, one of the things that I really admire and respect about Christine is a willingness to engage in conversations that might be a little uncomfortable, right? You read a letter to the editor about yourself that casts you in a really kind of harsh light, and you don't know the person on the other side of that letter, but you were willing to approach them and kind of have a moment of discomfort, but that doesn't keep you from having some opportunity for understanding with that person and some exchange, and where, you know, he actually was able to help you understand why he felt moved to write that letter and where he was coming from, and ultimately your position. And I think that the willingness to even just engage in discomfort is something that is so important in our leadership. You know, I know that, like, yes, some people have a greater tolerance for people who abstain from hard conversations or abstain from hard decisions. And I tend to be someone who is more attracted to the flame that is a Christine, where you say, this is a difficult thing. The world we live in is complex and complicated, and not everything is going to feel right all the time. But how do we get to a point where we get to understand where you're coming from so that we can build a direction together, rather than, oh, this is too complicated, I can't do this. So I really appreciate that about you, Christine.
Oh, thank you. It's so important to me as I think about what it will take to really shift the dynamics in our country and in our communities. I think those hard conversations are so important, and not, you know, I said to him, I'm not calling for your vote. It seems clear to me that I do not have your vote. I want to understand you and where you're coming from. You're clearly very passionate, and I think I can learn something from your perspective. So it's something that matters to me beyond this campaign.
And I think Kenneth would like to say something.
Yeah, I'm the one who started out rather abrasively with pointing to that reader's comment in today's Courier. And the reason I brought it up was actually to hear something like I've been hearing the last 5-6 minutes from you. I wondered, you know, how you reacted to what they said about you. And it's so informative to hear that you can dialogue with anybody. And I hope that is true, because that's very, very important. And especially over, well, not especially, but also over the the racist issues. And that was involved in this reader's comment in the paper. I think the way you spoke about police killing or murdering others, but behind that was your concern for the Black people who are being killed by police today, I think. And that's a very important problem as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you. Yeah, I will say, when both of those letters came out, I definitely had a moment of sadness that was, you know, both this feeling of I communicated in a way that this person didn't hear, but also that it is so core to me to have these kinds of conversations. So it's, you know, to be compared to someone like Trump is, again, a new experience, but also just so antithetical to even how I approach the issue that I was writing about. So I take the moment of, you know, I take a moment to feel,
something else, somebody else. So that's not ours.
Yeah, that was an alarm, I think, at Carolyn's house.
Okay, it sounded like a smoke alarm.
You know, one thing I would say is, for those of you who might be interested, this online magazine called medium.com carries a lot of Christine's articles in it. And the one that was referred to in the Courier is there as well. So you just have to Google medium.com and then Christine Marjada, and you'll find it. It's just a wonderful article, I thought. So just wanted to add that.
Also, are we going to mention that we taped this conversation tonight? I hope you all will give us your releases. so that we can make it available. Not everyone could make it tonight. So we told them they could access our reflections tonight.
Great. Well, thank you again, everyone, for joining us and for staying with us for the whole hour. It's really been a lot of fun observing you kind of take in Christine and ask her the questions and make the comments that are important to you. And it makes me really happy as someone who's just here hoping that we can get the word out, get more people excited about this opportunity for new leadership here in Claremont, new, incredibly experienced, visionary, and capable leadership here in Claremont. If you haven't yet had a chance, I would really appreciate it if you would go to the campaign website, which is christineforclaremont.com. So Christine spelled the conventional way, F-O-R, Claremont.com. And if you haven't had a chance to endorse, you could do that there on the website. We'd love to bring you a sign for your yard. Lynn and I are tag teaming and getting some signs out. So just let Lynn know that you'd like a sign and we'll make sure that you get one. But please do go to our site. And if you're so moved, we'd greatly appreciate your endorsement. Thank you.
And this is a very critical time right now too, because what I'm hearing is that the race is very close. So don't be shy. Move on out.
Yes, that's right. Thank you, Lynn. The moment is now. Thank you very much, everyone.
Well, thanks
Thank you, Christine and Phalana.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us, Lynn. Charlene. Good night, everyone.
A nice after dinner treat.
Thank you all so much.
Okay.
And Charlene, thank you for hosting. Phalana.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Susan.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for your support, Susan.
Yeah.
Yes, Susan, where are you?
Yeah, Susan.
Oh, there you are. Yeah.
Oh,
Thank you, Susan.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Right.
Take care, everyone.
And Lynn, I suppose the recording will, Susan will manage the recording and sharing that with